Welcome back. Continuing from the point where we left, we are going to talk about writing the graphs. I'll just take you through a quick revision in next 2 to 3 minutes, and then we'll discuss the practical examples of graphs that we were discussing a few minutes back. So we discussed about a few myths about writing an essay. Some people say that you're supposed to describe stuff, but the fact is that you're not supposed to describe, you're supposed to summarize, and you are supposed to write what you see. You are not supposed to add any details from your side. You're supposed to be very precise, combine the information and present it. Like when you're talking about writing about a trend, you are supposed to write the whole stuff from one point to next. You're not supposed to talk about individual years, as we discussed. And the question, as you can see, says summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons, which means you are supposed to do three things: summarize the information by doing trending. So trend, comparison, and highlight. These are the three things that you're supposed to do. We wrote what is this. We understood what is a trend, what is a comparison, what is a highlight. And then we discussed in detail about the evaluation criteria. We also discussed that it's a task. This is called as International English Language Testing System. It's language testing system, but it's actually checking how well do you do a task in English, which means you are not supposed to win or lose. What I mean to say is it's not a competition the way it happens in our academics, in our academic schools and colleges, where two people can get marks based on how they perform, and there are very minor differences in people's marks. Here all the people can get same marks, and if you do well you end up getting good marks. So it's not a competition, it's a task that you're supposed to do. We discussed about certain phrases and words that you can use in the essay, and then we were at this example. Okay, so how to analyze a graph? When you look at a graph, the first thing that you should think about is what kind of trends do you see in the graph? What kind of comparisons can you make? And what is the highlight? Like, for example, if I see the trends, I see, so this is about London Underground Station passengers, just to recap, and we see that the number of passengers is fluctuating. So we can say that the passengers is fluctuating. First thing that you write about a graph is an introduction. Then you talk about trends, comparisons, and highlights, and then you sum up the whole thing in a beautiful sentence, which is like a parting sentence, as you can see. You can pause the video, read the content once. So if you want to read the answer first, you can definitely do that. And after that, we can continue our discussion. So you can pause and read the answer and make sense out of it. Those who have not seen the previous video can go there. I would paste the link of that video here, so you would be able to quickly jump to that, and that will give you an idea. All right. So basically, if you look at the introduction is just a paraphrase of the statement given there in the rubric. You don't have to invent or write a different introduction. You can always paraphrase the rubric itself, the question itself, to write the introduction. We'll see some more examples. The graph shows fluctuations in the number of travelers at a London Underground station over the course of a day from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. The graph shows there's no need of the fluctuations, so you can say fluctuations in the number of travelers at a London Underground station. So this was given in the question itself. You can simply paraphrase it. Then you're supposed to write one line which sums up the whole thing. So it starts with overall. Overall, there were marked fluctuations in number of travelers with peaks in mornings and evenings. So, in one line, you have kind of summarized the whole thing. And the word that you have used is marked fluctuations. So as you can see, there are marked fluctuations or conspicuous fluctuations. So, you can use these kind of adjectives, and it is good to kind of by heart them, because you would be getting the same kind of graphs wherein you can use the same structures, and you can put values in brackets. This is one good way of, it's not 8 a.m. There should be a correction. It should be 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. So this is incorrect. 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. is wrong. It is 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. All right, the busiest times are mornings and evenings, but afternoons show moderate crowd. Okay, fine. There is a sharp increase between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. So we are doing trending now. We're not talking about every single time as we discuss. It's talking about the duration from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. and it is combined and it is called as sharp increase, which is fine. With 400 people using the station at 8 o'clock. After this, the numbers drop quickly to less than 200 at 10. So at 10 o'clock, it is less than 200. At 10 o'clock, between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m., the number rises with a plateau of just 300 people using the station. So you can put it in whatever words we can. If I have to paraphrase it, I would say from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., the numbers remained constant at around 300 passengers. So I can say this from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. the numbers remained constant, or the numbers varied from 100 to 300. uh, the numbers remained steady at around 300. I can take an average and say that also. So from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., it was more or less steady at around 300 passengers at the underground station. But then again, there was a peak, and I mean, there was a rise and a fall from 4 to 8 p.m. From 4 p.m. to 8 p.m., we can again see that there was a sharp increase followed by a sharp decline, a structure similar to what we saw from 6 to 10. So we can draw these kind of comparisons. These two structures, which are from 6 to 10 and from 4 to 8, are more or less similar. So while describing this 4 to 8, we can always give a reference of 6 to 10. So as we saw in the morning, in the evening also there was a sharp increase from and followed by a sharp decline from 4 a.m. to 8 p.m. Then at the end from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. there was a slight fluctuation. Finally, at 10 the numbers were at 100, which was the minimum during the day, or it was actually 100 at a number of places. So it was at 100, we can say. So basically, you're not two, three things which are important. You're supposed to draw, I mean, you're supposed to talk about trends, and trend means we are talking about not individual points. So we are not talking about 6 a.m., 7 a.m., 8 a.m. We are talking about from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. together. So we are clubbing the information, and again from 8 to 10 like this for the whole graph. We are not talking about individual time points, we are talking about a span of time, not about individual hours. So that's about trending. We can talk about, like, if I have to divide this whole graph, I can divide it in three different parts. The first part is the morning part, from morning 6 to 10. So I can say that from 6 to 10 there was a sharp increase followed by a sharp decline. The highest count during the morning hours was at 400, which was the first peak, as we can observe in this graph. From 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., the numbers were almost steady at around 300 passengers. But then from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m., we can see a constant, a steady fall where the numbers reached its least at around 100 for 4 p.m. So I have talked about this as one thing. And then from 4 to 8, again, I can club information and I say that there was a steady rise from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m., followed by a steep fall from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., or you can say 1800 hours to 2000 hours, followed by a moderate fluctuation at the end till 10, like that. So basically, all I'm trying to say is when you're trending, club the information, talk about highlights. Highlights are the highest points, which is already highlighted at the in the overall structure. And then at the end, you can again write the overall. Overall, the graph shows that the station is most crowded in the late morning and early evening. So late morning is like 8 o'clock and early evening is like 6 p.m. So that's the like takeaway from the graph. So you are supposed to do these tasks while analyzing the graph. Identify what trends, comparisons, and highlights are there. Trend is something which shows a constant pattern of either an increase or a decrease. Comparison, as we saw, we can compare this part of the morning and this part in the evening. A comparison can be where we draw similarity or when we draw a contrast. So like we can say that while in the mornings and evenings there were drastic fluctuations, during the afternoon, after comma, during the afternoon, the numbers were more or less steady. So, we can draw comparisons. What I'm trying to say is a comparison can be between two similar things where we can say both are same, or two dissimilar things where we can say A is different than B. So we can draw comparisons like that, and then the highlights where the numbers are highest or the lowest. This is the structure that you follow while writing about a graph. You're supposed to talk about the graph, and you have to take care of whether you are supposed to write in present or past tense. There would be situations where some future projections are shown in the graph, and we are going to see some examples of that sort. Start with the overall picture, talk about major trends and minor trends, draw comparisons and highlights, and then talk about the overall picture once again at the end. Yes, how to write. So whenever you are describing a graph, you can always go from generic to specific. What I mean to generic to specific is you can talk about things in a generic way first. Like for example, if you are in a flight and if your plane is reaching the destination or your airport, when it is going down, as you go down, the picture becomes more and more clear. Similarly, while writing about the graph, you should talk about the big picture first and then talk about specifics later in the paragraph. So you can start with an overall picture. Overall, we can see dramatic fluctuations, or there were sharp fluctuations throughout the day. Now, when we can talk about the morning, then afternoon, and then the evening. So like this, you can structure your information from generic to specific. You can start a paragraph with a goal in mind, in terms of you are going to talk about a trend, a comparison, or a highlight, or you are going to talk about a certain timeline. For example, in this case, we can divide it into three sections. First is the morning, then the afternoon, and the evening. You can always start with a topic sentence, like during the morning we can see sharp fluctuations. So this is a generic thing. From 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. there was a sharp rise, where the numbers from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. there was a sharp rise where the numbers rose from 800 to 400. But then after 8 a.m. there was a sharp decline, or a drastic fall where the numbers uh, fell from 400 to almost 200 by 10. So, you're talking about generic to specific. You started with the topic sentence, and then you kept on describing what you wanted to say. Okay. Write down the vocabulary and verbiage you would like to use. So while analyzing the graph, you can always write down in rough, drastic fall, or dramatic increase, or steep rise, or steep fall, or moderate increase, or moderate fall. So you can use these kind of structures later on while describing the describing your graph. Okay, so yeah, it could be a line graph, or you can get a pie chart. There are different types of graphs that we are going to see. We'll just go through some examples very, very quickly here to show you different types of graphs that could come in the exam. Now, this is one very unique example, and I want to discuss about it. Although I'm going to share these files there, so all the examples which are there in this are would be shared with you. I'll send you a link. You can click on that and you can get all these graphs. Basically, if you look at this graph, let me just highlight this one first. Just give me a second. I'll adjust the split so that you would be able to understand the graph first, and then we can look at the So if you look at the graph, it's a very unique example of a graph where the content is not just in the present tense. If you look at this, the pie chart shows units of electricity. No, not this one. I'm sorry. I wanted to talk about this graph. So this graph is a unique example where we are talking about future. This is what I wanted to highlight. If you look at this, let me just read the question quickly. The chart below give information on ages of the charts below give information on the ages of populations of Yemen and Italy in 2000 and projections of 2050. So which means if we just look at Italy first for the purpose of understanding, I mean Yemen first for the purpose of understanding, the numbers shown here are 2000 and 2050, which means these are future projections. Like for example, just to give you a glance of it, there are three different categories of populations shown here: 0 to 14 years, 15 to 59 years, and 60 plus years. So 0 to 14 is this zebra kind of lines. This is 0 to 14. So as I can see, 0 to 14 was at around 50%. So half the population was from 0 to 14 years in the year 2000, which is projected to fall to 37%. So from a fall of almost 13% is projected here, as we can see from this one. You know, so this 0 to 14 is going to fall, whereas there is a rise in the population of 15 to 50 years. So the population of 15 to 50 years was at 46% here, and it's going to become 57%. So almost 11% rise. So we can say that a fall in the population of 0 to 14 years is expected, is projected, and a corresponding increase is projected for the population of 15 to 50 years. In fact, whenever you speak, you should speak about the rise first and the fall later, and whatever remains steady should come at the end, which means I would just restructure it. Uh, when we compare the two pie charts of Yemen, we see that a dramatic increase is expected in the population of 15 to 50 years, which is projected to rise from 46.3% to 57.3%, marking an increase of almost 11%. So you talked about the increase first, and a corresponding fall is expected in the population of 0 to 14 years, which is expected to fall from 50 to 37%. And even if you don't talk about this 3% to 5%, it would be absolutely fine, because as we discussed earlier, you are supposed to talk only about the main features, right? So I can ignore speaking about the third group altogether, and I can go to the Italy one. The point which I wanted to highlight was about the tense and the language that you're going to use in this. It's talking about the present and future, so you are supposed to use the future projections, which means you are supposed to use future tense while describing these kind of graphs. So you would talk about now this is one more challenge, that if there are more than one objects being discussed, like for example here we are talking about Yemen and Italy, which are like two countries, and the graph of two countries are given here. So how should you draw comparison? Should you talk about Yemen 2000 and Italy 2000, and then Yemen 2050 and Italy 2050? Or you should talk about Yemen first and then about Italy, which means you can talk about Yemen, and for Yemen 2000 and 2050, and then for Italy for 2000 and 2050. My suggestion would be to go one country at a time. So you can talk about Yemen first. You can speak everything about Yemen the way we discussed, and then you can come to Italy and draw comparisons with Yemen, because you have already discussed about Yemen. It makes sense to draw comparisons. So once you are done with Yemen, I would speak about Italy. I can say that uh, in Italy, the highest population was of 15 to 59 years, which constituted almost two-thirds of the total population, maybe three-fourths of the how much it is, 61%. So 61% is something very near to 75%. So I can say almost two-thirds of the total population, in bracket I can say 61%. So this was the largest group, followed by 60 plus years population, which constituted almost a quarter of the total, right? I can ignore this one because this is the least one. The Now what is increasing here, the this population is going to increase. So from 24 to it has become 42, which is almost double. The population of 60 plus years, or the elderly population, is expected to jump from 24, expected to uh, yeah, rise from, so yeah, we are using this kind of word, expected to rise from 24 to 42%, which is quite a dramatic rise. And a corresponding fall is expected in the population of 15 to 50 years, which is 15 to 59 years, which is expected to fall from or decrease from 61% to 46%. And even if I ignore this one, you know, I can simply write a small line about the third one. Now, if I have to draw a comparison between these two, I can see this black population. I mean, uh, a conspicuous similarity between Yemen and Italy is that elderly population is going to constitute the major section of the overall population in both the countries. This black mark is big here, it's big here as well. So I can draw that similarity. So this is how you are supposed to draw comparisons. First, talk about one country, then talk about the other country. And while talking about the other country, you can talk about similarities and differences. And yeah, one conspicuous difference that we can see in future projections is that in Yemen, 0 to 14 would constitute almost 37%, whereas in Italy it is expected to be a very small part, which is just 11%. So, like this, we can draw similarities and uh, differences between the two countries. You don't have to write a lot. You're supposed to write 150 words. So you can choose only a few bullet points or main points that you want to discuss about, and you can summarize that. The best way to prepare for these kind of graphs is to go through certain examples. I'm going to write this example there in the description, and I'll provide the link also. You can go through it thoroughly to understand how it is written. My advice to you would be to go through some good examples so that you are confident about writing on different types of graphs. And in case you need any help, you're most welcome to contact me. Thank you so much. All the very best. I wish you get very good marks in your test. Again, to reiterate, this is a test wherein you are supposed to complete a task. You are not competing. So it is good to just fulfill the requirements of the task so that you end up getting good marks rather than losing them.